I have installed the SU carburetor onto the Mini, and my Mini is a bit of a special Mini in the sense that it has a modified intake manifold and a modified exhaust and a slightly modified cylinder head. So therefore, I like to get a bit more power out of it, and you'll see that once we start playing with the needles. But right now, the carburetor is at baseline, and what we're going to do first of all now is to adjust the air-fuel ratio at idle, so adjusting the idle mixture. And therefore, you need to crank up the engine, let it warm up first, and then we're going to start looking at the 4 different methods on how we can do this. And before doing any adjustment to the engine, it has to be at operating temperature. So let it warm up first. So the car is now at working temperature, so now let's start adjusting the idle mixture, and we'll do that by adjusting the idle mixture screw on the side of the carburetor. If you turn it clockwise, so turning it in, then you're going to enrich the mixture. If you turn it anti-clockwise or turning it out, then you're going to make the mixture leaner. My aim is to set it around 14.7, which is the stoichiometric value for gasoline. However, most classic cars and most cars with carburetors are not going to run that smooth at tickover or idle with that value. So I might be setting it a little bit more rich, probably around the 13.4, 13.2 area of AFR. Now you're probably going to wonder now how do you know what the AFR is? I have to be able to measure it. Yes, and you're absolutely right. You should be able to measure it. There are many different ways of doing this, one more accurate than the other one. And the first method we're going to use is by using an air-fuel ratio dial or gauge. I have one installed on this Mini, but if you don't have that one, then you can skip this part and go to the next method of adjusting it and checking it. The AFR gauge is the most accurate method of doing it. So if you're really serious about tuning your Mini, or any other car with an SU carburetor, or any carburetor for that matter, it's good to have an AFR gauge. But you don't have to have it. So let's start with that one. I'm going to give you now a little bit of a close-up on the AFR gauge. You will see the reading, and then I will adjust the idle adjustment screw, and you will see the AFR reading on the dial going up and down. All right, so let's start. And as you can see right now, the AFR is sitting around 13.3, 13.4. That's what I would like to have it. But now let me show you what the effect is if I modify the idle adjustment screw. I'm going to turn the adjustment screw clockwise, and now you should see a richer mixture. So the figure would supposed to go down on the AFR dial. Now I can't see that one from here, of course, but you should be able to see that. And as you can see right now, we are at 11.5. If I turn it the other way around and turning it more outwards, then you will see that the mixture is going to get leaner again. Now while we adjust the idle mixture screw, make sure that your RPMs are staying around 1,000 RPMs. And if not, keep adjusting your idle speed screw. So I'm going to turn it out. And now I'm going extreme out. And now you can see that the mixture is actually very lean. It's around 16, 17. So that's not good. And you can actually hear it on the engine that it's not running smoothly. So I'm going to tune it back to where it was. 13.4 sounded to me like the right one. Yeah, that's about right. So now we have an AFR which is 13.4, which is a bit more rich for idle, but that's good because I can listen to my engine and I can hear it that it's running quite smoothly. And that's so important. Just don't go with the figures alone. Listen to your engine. And the best place to listen to it is at the exhaust. You should have a nice and steady uniform sound there if it's running smoothly on idle. There should be no puffing whatsoever. Now I know I have a little bit of condensation happening because as the car is inside and it's kind of cold outside. So, but that will go away over time. And by the way, the engine is actually warmed up. But let me listen to you to that sound. that's how it should sound. So we finished adjusting the idle mixture by using an AFR dial or gauge. But I understand that not everybody will have that available, so there are other ways of doing this. And one other way, which is a very good way, is using something what we call color tune. And color tune is a transparent spark plug that you fit into your engine, and you look through the glass and you can see the color of the flames. And I'm going to show that to you in a few minutes. It is not as accurate as an AFR gauge, but it is fairly good. And this is what comes with the package with the color tune. It's kind of a spark plug in the back, but it has glass around it. So you can look through this side here and you will see the color of the flames burning inside the cylinder. You got an extension with it, so you can hook that up, so you can connect a spark plug to it and just turn it in like this. Like so. And then you put the spark plug on the other side, and then you can actually use it. If it's in a very difficult position, then you can use this kind of a looking glass to put it in with the mirror and so on. And there's a copper washer, of course, that needs to go on the back. And if you remember your high school days, then you for sure remember Mr. Kelvin, who found out that if you heat up a piece of carbon, which is pitch black, and while you're heating it up, while the temperatures increase, the color was changing from dark red to lighter red to orange to yellow to green to light blue, darker blue, and eventually it actually became white. So he made a relationship between the colors of light and temperature. Well, color tune works a bit the same way, and that's the principle that is applied on the color tune. You're looking through a transparent spark plug, and based on the color of the burning gases in your cylinder, you can make up your mind and decide if you're too lean or if you're too rich. Now, a rich mixture will be identified by yellow-orange. So orange is extremely rich, yellow is a little bit less rich. Blue and bosom blue, which is the color of a bosom burner, and if you remember your chemical classes, and you'll see that color in a few minutes anyway, that is about the right mixture at that moment in time. And the other color, like white, that's no good. You're probably running extremely lean, so that is not good either. So keep an eye on that. And remember that if we run extremely lean, then we have a very high temperature, and if we're running extremely rich, then the engine has a lower temperature, or the burning gases have a lower temperature. So you can see that that actually is matching up with Mr. Kelvin. So let us install it, and then you can actually see what I mean. So we'll start by removing a spark plug. Now I'm going to take one. Now typically you can do the color tune test on all your cylinders. Now I have a single carburetor for all 4 cylinders, so I don't need to worry about that. But if you have dual carburetors, then, or even 4 carburetors or 4 barrels, then check out which part of the carburetor fits to what cylinder, and then you actually might put the color tune on the different cylinders one at a time. So now our transparent spark plug will go in, the color tune itself, and I'm going to put the washer up because I want to have the washer. Now, it may be that for your engine, you might need an adapter. Mine is a typical 14 mil color tune, but they do have adapters for different sizes of spark plugs. It's a bit twiggling. There we go. Never force those things. They should go in by hand. You're not going to tighten it too hard, but hard enough so it doesn't leak, of course, because that wouldn't be good. All right, hand tight. We're going to put up the spark plug extension. And then I will attach my spark plug lead to the top of this extender. And we're all set. So I'm having the camera now pointed exactly at that spark plug, and look at the edge here. You will probably start seeing the flames. I don't know what they will be. I left the carburetor as we just adjusted it to 13.4 AFR. So let's see. And you can actually see now the color of that burning. So now I'm going to make the mixture more rich. You see how that color changed to more of a yellowish color? if I make the mixture more lean or return it, it's going to turn back into blue. You see how that color changes? So now we have getting kind of a bluish color. And this is about the color of blue that you want to achieve. And if you now were to check on the AFR dial, you would see that we're about back to 13.4. Now the interesting part is if you accelerate, and I know we are now still running statically, you will see how that mixture should increase. It should become really yellow. And this is how you can actually use color tuning. So far we've done the idle adjustment in two different methods, AFR and the color tune. Now some people, they like to look on the spark plugs, and you can actually see the color on the spark plugs. It shouldn't be black, it shouldn't be white, it should be kind of dark brown. That's then the right mixture, but that is a bit more difficult because that will change depending on the different regimes of the engine. But this is another method, of course, and of course other people will just listen to the engine and follow their guts feeling of what is right, and listen to how the engine is behaving. And that's another way of doing it. That's going to be the last method I'm going to show you. But now we're going to use a other method, which is called a gas analyzer or carbon monoxide meter. Cheap product, but it works great. So for the next method, we're going to use a gas tester, and don't mind the brand, they come in different brands, but Gunson is a pretty good one and cheap. And now I'm not making a commercial again for Gunson, but at least I can tell you what I think it is. So this little device is going to measure the carbon monoxide in the exhaust. So on idle running, try to get around 3% or even 4.5% might be good. So we will adjust the idle mixture screw between 3 and 4.5. And you do this by sticking this probe into the exhaust when the engine is actually warmed up. You need to let this gas tester settle first for a few minutes in the clean air, so without gases around. And then you will have to adjust this dial here until you have 2%. And then you can start testing it. You will need, of course, also power for that. So it's going to need 12 volts power supply, but you can take this from your battery. Nothing really special. So this is another good test besides the color tune and the actual AFR. My preference is still the AFR, but still this is a good test, especially if you have to take the car to the CT. I connected the gas tester to the battery of the Mini, and I'm going to let it sit now for a while because it needs to calibrate itself to the carbon monoxide that we have currently in the air. So it's measuring it to the probe, and then we'll adjust it to 2%, as you see right there, and you can actually do that by turning this knob. But right now I need to let it sit here for a while. Now if you do so, make sure that you're working clean air. So the engine should not be running, there should be no exhaust fumes around it. Just clean air, environmental air to measure the carbon monoxide. And then we adjust it for 2%. And once that has been sitting here for about 5 to 10 minutes, then we'll stick it in the exhaust and then we'll measure it. I've set the calibration to 2% and I inserted actually the probe into the exhaust, and now you can actually see we are running at around 4.3% of carbon monoxide, which is pretty near to the legal limit, which is 4.5%. So now I'm going to reduce the richness of the mixture because we're still running at an AFR of 13.2. So let me reduce that, and then actually we should see with a leaner mixture that this is actually going down. So now I reduced it. Now let's see what happens. It takes a while before it's coming through, so you have to give it a bit of time. So now we are at 4.2. I'm going to give it a little bit more, or I should actually say less. See, now it's starting to go down, 4.1. So it's really going down now to 3.4 because actually now we are running a bit more lean. So this is how you can adjust the idle mixture as well if you have to go to an MOT. So, but I'm going to put it back to a little bit more rich because I don't like it running that lean. The engine doesn't run as smooth. So let me put that back. And the last method is by hooking up your RPM meter, keeping an eye on it, running around 1,000 RPMs, and then adjust the idle mixture screw by turning it in first until the engine speed goes up, and then stop, and then turn it a little bit back until it falls back down. So let's do that. So I'm turning now clockwise, increasing the RPMs, as you can see. And now we are about 1,000. And we are about the top now. It doesn't change anything, so I'm going to turn that back a little bit. And that should be about right. Now while you do this, you might want to readjust the idle speed a bit. So again, from the basic adjustment that we done statically, so putting the jet level with the bridge of the carburetor, turn it 2 full clocks clockwise, which descends the jet, put it on the engine, start up the engine, and then turn the jet clockwise, so making it richer until the engine starts picking up speed again to its maximum RPM, and then go back a little bit, like half a turn or a turn, and then you have more or less the idle mixture setting for the engine. We have completed now the idle fuel mixture setting. We've used 4 different methods. We used a AFR gauge or dial, which is very precise. Then we have used the color tune, and that lined up with the AFR dial or gauge. And then finally we moved on to the gas analyzer, where we did set the carbon monoxide to about 3.5, 3.2%, which is a bit less accurate, of course, than all the rest. But the gas analyzer is a good tool to prepare your Mini or your car to go to an MOT, because the maximum limit is 4.5% carbon monoxide, at least where I live. And then finally we did a complete manual setup without any tools except an RPM meter, because you need to see the RPMs going up, and you increase the richness of the mixture until you reach the maximum RPM, and then you're turning it back like half a turn, and that typically works out well. Now I've done all this on a single carburetor. You can imagine if you have to do this on dual carburetors, you need to do this twice, and it's a little bit more complex, but the methodology is exactly the same. But now I want to show you something else. You might remember in my previous video when we tested the Mini out on the road, it was kind of hesitant for acceleration. So increasing RPMs, it was like holding in, and then it almost died on me a few times, and then it picked up again. And that was the result, most likely, of no oil in the damper. Now, currently, I have removed the oil out of the damper, so you'll see the effect. So let me give you a little bit of a close-up of what's going to happen. And then I'm going to put oil into the damper, and then you will see the difference. There's no oil in the damper. I'm just going to crank it up and then see what happens. Now while the engine is running idle, everything seems to be alright. But watch when I'm trying to give it some throttle. Slow throttle works, right? But watch this if I give it a little bit more violent throttle. You hear how this is kind of like hesitating? It doesn't do what it's supposed to do, does it? And that is because the damper is not doing its job. There is no oil inside. So in other words, the piston is flying up too high and too fast. So I'm going to try to show you what happens with the piston. I'm going to use my GoPro and my iPhone actually to film what's going on with the piston while there is no oil in the damper. So let me try to rig this up, and then you can have a look. I'm going to show you actually the picture that I'm going to have on my iPhone, so I'm going to film that part so you can actually see it. So I got my GoPro set now, and we are looking inside the carburetor, and we can see the piston. So if I now open up the throttle, you'll see that the piston will move up. See how slow that moves? But if I really do it violently, you will see what the piston will do. See that? So now let me put some oil into the damper, okay? Okay. So let's do the same thing all over again. We're putting the GoPro onto the carburetor and see what happens. And now you can see that the piston is reacting a lot more retarded and it doesn't go up that high. So what we have seen is that without oil in the damper or the wrong oil, the acceleration is a bit difficult. It's hesitating. The engine doesn't pick up the revs. Now I know we don't do it under load, but under load it's even worse, believe me. Because that's going to force the piston even higher up. And you could see that without the oil, the piston is moving up a lot higher than actually with the oil. And it is far more constrained with the oil. The piston is held back. It does move up, sure it does, but slowly. And you could actually hear that the engine is picking up properly. So that's the importance of oil in the damper and the right oil. So you might want to play with the thickness of the oil. De facto, SAE20 is the right oil. And SU sells this oil, it's monograde oil, and it works almost in all circumstances. So the next thing I'm going to do is change out the needle, and I'm going to put a bit of a more rich needle in. You've seen the needles before. Right now we still have the ADP needle in it, but I'm going to install the AEJ needle, which is the far more rich needle, because I want to have more power on higher RPMs. And also I'm going to install a stronger spring. I'm going to move the spring from a 4.5 ounce to an 8 ounce spring. And then we'll see what happens. And let's remove the dashpot. You might have seen that I have not connected all the cables. That wasn't necessary for this kind of tests we've done so far. Obviously, if you're going to do a test right, we'll hook it all up. So now I can remove gently the dashpot. And the spring, and this is the 4.5 ounce spring, the red spring. I'm going to change that out to an 8 ounce spring. And here is the needle, so we're going to change the needle as well. Right. So this is the red spring, 4.5 ounce. So this is the one I removed. That's the new one I'm going to put in. It's a yellow spring, it's an 8 ounce spring. And I'm going to fit the more richer needle, the AEJ, as you've seen on the curve. That was the blue curve on the graph before. So let me remove the current needle, which is the standard needle, which is an ADP needle. Okay, a bit more. All right, that should do it. And take the spring off. So this is a new ADP needle, and this is going to be the AEJ needle, far more rich. I don't know if you can actually see the thickness difference, but let's hold it next to each other. I don't think you can actually see the difference a lot, but okay, it is different. So just double checking on the number AEJ, so that's correct. I'm going to put the spring back up. Last time I did this, the spring jumped away and I almost lost it. It's such a small little thing. So let me put this back together now. And then we should be good to go. You want to put in the needle the right way, of course, and making sure that the bottom part is flush with the piston. Not too tight. And this is good. Now the needle is in. And now we can mount the parts. I have the piston filled up with oil. It's a bit easier when it's out of the car. And now we need to just fit it. There we go. So normally there's a clip that is holding the dashpot, but I removed the clip so it's easier for tuning purposes. Once I'm all done, I will put the clip back. So the 8 ounce spring goes in, which is, by the way, the yellow spring. If you put up the dashpot, you have to make sure that you don't wind up the spring by rotating the dashpot. So make sure everything is aligned properly from the start. So now, of course, with all the changes I've done, I may have to readjust my idle AFR. And I will do so. If you wonder how much oil you need to put in, it's about 6 millimeters from the top rim on this specific carburetor. So it differs a bit from carburetor to carburetor, but you can find this in the specifications manual. So let's see what the engine is doing if we crank it up. Well, that started pretty easy. Check it out. Oh, this sounds like a lot better, you know, immediate response. So let us have another look on the actual piston, what the piston is doing. Right, so we're looking again at the piston. So I'm going to give it some throttle and see what happens with the piston. So now that's moving quite properly. See that how that moves? And it isn't moving as high as before, so that's what I kind of wanted to have, so I have a better venturi effect. And right now I have readjusted the idle mixture and I'm running at a 13.6, 13.7, but you can see that that mixture is quite stable now. Just going to see what happens if I accelerate with the actual mixture. So I think this is looking quite alright. It goes a bit on the lean side, but that's okay because there is no load. If there was more load on the engine, then you would actually see it becoming more rich. So the next thing we need to do is a test ride. So you're probably going to ask me now, how did I know what needle to put in and what spring to put in? Well, that is pretty simple. My engine is a modified engine, so it has a modified exhaust and a modified intake manifold. It also has a modified cylinder head. Not drastic, but slightly modified. So it can deliver a bit more power. If you're gonna need a bit more power, you're gonna need a bit more gas. So I want to tune this engine towards the power range, not to the efficiency range or the environmental range, more towards the power. So when I took this car with this baseline needle in it, the ADP needle, onto a test road and I accelerated, the car was hesitant. Now, part of the hesitation was due to the lack of oil in the damper. I know that, and I've demonstrated it to you. So that will fix part of the problem. But also on wide open, going uphill, the car was not delivering the amount of power because it just didn't got enough fuel. Because the needle was too thick, too lean. So that's why I decided then to look in the catalog for a more rich needle. And that's why I keep plotting those needles. If I see a needle which are having, when it's all the way up, a very thin tip, then I know this is a richer needle. So if you plot this out, you can see on the curve. And remember this graph I showed you with the blue curve on in the previous part? That's where you can find out where you get the power, where you get more fuel. So in my specific case, I'm getting more fuel when the piston is halfway its position. That's when I'm going to get the extra fuel delivered to the engine. That's where I'm going to get the extra power, and that's exactly what I wanted. So that's why I went for this type of needle, but you need to plot the curves, otherwise it's going to be very hard and it's going to be a wild guess. The second thing I did as well was to putting in a stronger spring. So how did I know that I wanted to use a stronger spring? Well, I didn't really, but I wanted to suppress that piston as much as I could so it doesn't go up too high, so I can keep my venturi effect. And the spring pressure is really related to wide open. So you don't want that piston to fly up all the way to the top too early, even though the damper is doing its job. But if the piston goes all the way to the top too early, then the venturi becomes too big, the opening, and actually you lose the venturi effect of sucking out fuel out of the jet. So that's why I put a stronger spring in. Now I'm going to take it now for a test ride and see what it does. Maybe you have to go back to a lighter spring because maybe the spring is too strong now that I can't get it wide open on a steep hill. So now it's a matter of driving the car and testing it out. And that's it. I don't think I need to change the needle anymore. That's probably a done deal. But I might have to revert back to a different spring. I still have another spring laying around, which is a 4.5. So let's see what it does on the road. So let us take it on the road and see what the result is. That's pretty good. And it's very responsive. So let's take it for a spin.
So I think this was quite all right.
So we are back from our test ride, and I did the test ride actually with the air filter on because I forgot to mention that before. So that's something you need to do. Put the air filter up for sure when you start tuning because it can make a difference. You could see that the car now accelerates pretty good. It does not hesitate anymore. And in fourth gear, when I floor the gas pedal, it's picking up as well. So I'm quite happy with this. It runs nicely at idle. It starts easy. And I have a idle AFR at around 13.2 to 13.4. It fluctuates a little bit because it's a carburetor. And overall, it wasn't all that hard. So if you want to tune your Mini, have a look on part 1 and part 2. But most of all, try out your Mini first before you start tuning. And identify what the shortcomings are. Identify if it's hesitant to pick up speed. Find out if you go wide open, if you still get enough power. And then based on that, you can decide if you want to tune for more power or more lean, more efficiency. That's up to you to decide. And based on that, you need to select the proper needle, either a richer needle or a leaner needle. And you can also decide in what region of the piston you want to have it. So stations are different for different needles. I wanted to have it like halfway the piston. I wanted to get more power because that's where I wanted to have it, and that seems to be working just fine. As for the spring, the load on the spring, I went for a little bit of a stronger spring, so it's going to hold back that piston a little bit, going all the way to the top, so I don't lose too much of my venturi effect. But this is something you need to try. There is no written rule, really, that I can say to you, well, do this or do that. You really need to try it out on the road under different driving circumstances. Of course, if you have a dyno, then put it on the dyno by all means, and then test it out on different RPMs and on different loads. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye-bye.